So now let's, without further ado, go forward and start our first session of the morning. It is Managing the Infusion of Lessons Learned Using Knowledge Aware. So we're going to learn how Lincoln Laboratory's engineering division is proposing to revitalize their approach to managing the infusion of lessons learned into the way they do business. And here to help us do that is Hart, who is Chief Engineer, Technical Staff, Mechanical Engineering at MIT Lincoln Laboratory. Come on up, Carl. Welcome. Thank you.
So I'm very excited to be here to give you a chance to hear our story on how we are approaching using knowledge-aware practices for lessons learned. And again, I'm Carl Hart with MIT Lincoln Laboratory. So similar to what Jasmine did yesterday, I wanted to take a moment to make sure we have a common definition around lessons learned. So I know in my organization, we have just an understanding that this is what it should be, but we all have different perspectives, I've realized. So I have found through researching knowledge that this definition that NASA provides in one of their knowledge policies, this is a policy that flows down from the top to all their business centers, really does a great job for me to understand what scope should be included in a lesson learned. So it starts with captured knowledge or understanding gained through experience which, if shared, would benefit the work of others. I'll stop there for a moment. So there's this idea that you have to capture the knowledge, and that takes energy. And so just capturing a lesson isn't really doing much towards making ourselves a better business or reducing occurrence of problems, but it's a start. It also identifies one strong idea, which it should benefit the work of others. This immediately talks to the need to establish who you're benefiting for knowledge, your audience. So a strong knowledge management practice has this common theme of specifically who's your audience, and that's a big part of where we're going with this. Secondly, moving on to, it describes a specific event, which basically identifies what occurred and what recommendations exist towards repeating a success or avoiding reoccurrences. So another kind of takeaway from here is that event is important. Something happened that requires that energy to say, hey, I have something to pass forward, whether it's good or bad. So often lessons learned have a really strong narrative associated with them. That narrative helps people understand the context of what happened if you didn't experience it firsthand. So I wanted to take a moment to just talk about the laboratory that I represent today and give you an idea of how lessons learned are kind of flowing in. So the laboratory was formed in 1951. We're a federally funded research and development center, and we're sponsored by the DoD. And basically at the top level perspective, our mission is advanced technology to address national security needs. So that's pretty wide, but the motivation there stands from the first time the laboratory established itself in the 50s to now. It's what we do every day. We wake up, we look at building systems that address this need. We have a wide range of efforts. We support studies, rapid investigations of what's possible. We influence different ideas through developing technology, forming the technology that could be used in future systems to create new capabilities. And then we actually have the far extreme, these must-succeed complex prototypes ranging from large RF antennas to big complex space systems. What's unique about the laboratory is that we cover many different disciplines, and our program ranges tend to be short to very long. So in the end, we develop prototypes. We don't mass produce anything. That makes us focus on getting it right often the first time, or just understanding there's risks that we're willing to take on for quick turn builds. But some of these programs have a long duration of time. So we have to carry our knowledge for often many, many years. And it could be another 6-7 months before another program hits their critical design review where they can learn from us, a program of the past. So we have this very long latent waiting time, which is one of our challenging aspects of lessons learned. But ultimately, we all believe that having that lessons learned process will allow us to meet our customers' expectations while reducing time and cost. So I represent the engineering division at the laboratory, and you can see here just a real quick snapshot of our mission divisions. So we range in capabilities from homeland protection, air traffic control, to tactical systems, communication systems, RF, optical, space systems technology. It's pretty wide, even down to wearable technologies in biotechnology, et cetera. But that is very big for me to try to envelope with knowledge. But what's unique from my vantage point in the engineering division is that we collaborate with all these mission divisions. We have the ability to provide and pass forward essentially our internal IP, what we've learned, and transfer that to all these mission divisions that come to us to realize the system. And we've had a few situations recently, issues that come up that could have been prevented. Big programs that are coming through, staffed, people are very busy, they're often moving very, very fast, that we need knowledge to help us make sure that these teams are prepared. So the engineering division has identified this need to do better. They initiated a knowledge management project, which I'm leading, and our charter is to look at knowledge in general, not just lessons learned, but inclusive of that, and look at different techniques to capture and focus on reusing and retaining that knowledge as opposed to a document-centric approach. So I mentioned reoccurring issues that are cropping up, themes, patterns. Those are things that are at the top of our minds right now. But I wanted to break this down into issues and desired solutions that's motivating us to do better. So we have staff, specialists, technicians. We all generate knowledge that's useful. We exchange this, but often these are siloed, never leaving email discussions, chats, one-on-one, face-to-face engagements. So our end state is to somewhat identify for everyone a standardized process to collect and share that knowledge. If we can give them that tool that makes this easier to collect working knowledge, I'll use that phrase a couple times in this talk, we start to have the ability to then do something else with that working knowledge. So it starts with how do you get people to get their knowledge outside of these other means. Next, knowledge that is available may no longer be accurate or relevant. This is a common theme, but we see it. It's very prevalent everywhere. We have wiki pages that are currently just hosting information, and you scratch your head and who's the last to edit this and use it? Was it used? So we seek out a way to create trusted knowledge through vetting, having promotion, encouraging continuous reviewing, and then a real strong commitment towards retiring knowledge. We want to get knowledge to a point where you don't have to remember it forever. And move on to knowledge is available, it's hard to find. Finding and searching and applying is a real thing. We don't want to lose that. We want people to be able to search and find faster. And having a process for a commitment to infusing knowledge into how we do business, it makes it not only that they don't no longer have to search, but it's there as part of our business practice, and that's the theme of my talk. And then lastly, when there is knowledge out there, you do not know if it's been used relevant, and there's no way to track its use. And this is kind of one of the foremost interests for us is we have these great checklists for key milestones. We have design reviews, but we don't track the exchange of information that occurs within those. So we've gone through a process of in this journey for the last year of self-reflection, and our internal review of our knowledge management practices are split between two. One, knowledge in general, and the second would be lessons learned specific. So for us, the great news is that we have a culture at all different levels to share and spread hardware knowledge. We want to exchange information. The not so great news is that we have very concerted efforts that happen over periods of time where the knowledge was there for people. But without a plan for continuity or a plan for sustaining that. It just was left there without being effective. We didn't have an auditing process, no patterns of reuse, no evidence of improvement. So we have a lost opportunity. And this is something which maybe many of you share, but it's certainly motivating for us to do better. From the lessons learned point of view, we have a good scenario that it's an acknowledged type of, it's a knowledge type that's acknowledged. We understand it. It's one way to promote information beyond a single program. And what's great there is that people understand that if I was to pass forth a lesson learned, somebody besides my program could learn from us. The not so great news is that these lessons aren't being effectively leveraged. They're not certainly being applied like we'd like to see them on future programs. We're relying upon people to make these connections. The audit is that our lessons create great narrative, but they don't allow us to easily evaluate whether we are compliant or not. And many of these lessons don't necessarily have clear paths towards infusing into changes in our business practice. And this low visibility of how lessons are used has the cycle of lack of interest to contribute. And that's not what we want to do. We want people to be encouraged to continue to participate because we can all benefit by getting this information beyond the silos of the programs. So I'm a very visual person, so this is kind of my simple way of showing that we have working knowledge that we do not want to change. We want a knowledge management practice that's not going to micromanage how people think day to day. But at some point, we have this question of how does knowledge flow towards organizational knowledge? And that big question mark there is really what's nebulous today for us. It's how does information flow to be considered a best practice or a checklist? It just is unclear. When it's unclear, you can't harness it and utilize it and make that be consistent. Next, once we've reached some type of critical mass for organizational knowledge, the questions that we're left with are, is it verified, relevant, impactful? And lessons learned are part of this process. And so as we started to think and research and reach out to peer organizations, we started to build a different vision of how we want to approach knowledge management. And this is still definitely in progress, but we want to take this working knowledge and we want to give that clear promotion path towards organizational knowledge. And we want to make it clear that this is not without a process. We want to establish a commitment to curating knowledge. The curation creates verified, trusted knowledge. And in the Department of Defense and the type of work that we do, having knowledge that is achieving these criteria is very important. Next, we want to find a way to promote. So we want to make sure that the knowledge, whether it's a lesson learned or a design checklist, it's relevant, unique, and significant. This is a big part of a governance process. What's important to be included in organizational knowledge? So for many of you that I've met today, you guys have a great start. People are identifying what that means. You've created a definition, and many of you started with design guides, et cetera. For us, we're learning that these are some of the gaps that we have. And so this movement towards promotion is very important to us. And then towards organizational knowledge, we want to make a strong commitment to this concept of use and infuse. We want to show that the knowledge is accessible, impactful, and that it actually drove change. And then the backside, we want to show evolution. We want to make sure that there's a commitment to our stakeholders that we're doing the right thing, and we want to show that the knowledge remains relevant and is improved. And worst case, if we can't infuse it, if it becomes overcome by events, we can retire it. So this very simplistic flow is helping drive some very strong conversations within the organization. And I mentioned I'm managing a project around knowledge right now, so sometimes I blend lessons learned and knowledge generically together, but to me it's all part of the same problem statement. So we've been able to reach out to NASA and JPL and have had an opportunity to learn from them. And we're continuously looking for opportunities to learn from others. But some of the key findings from our time with these organizations is that knowledge management is really at the top level supported, And there's this flow down to dedicated staff that makes sure that this is sustainable. So I think the theme that I'm hearing is that many organizations come here today where knowledge is supported. For a large organization like ours, we want to see that commitment from the top. And when that happens, we might be able to show that we can change and have it be changed for a long duration of time. And in 15 years from now, we like to look back and say this strong commitment to looking at knowledge and committing to using it and doing better will have paid dividends. The next common theme was they all have clear processes to submit and promote knowledge. So this really brought that gap to our forefront, that this idea of how would somebody promote something beyond themselves, beyond the program, beyond their own personal working knowledge for the way that we do business needs to be clearly defined. And then there's some need to have accountable parties that meet regularly to establish what those organizational requirements are, organizational knowledge. And this is a big part of defining a governance approach. How do you determine what belongs, what doesn't belong? And if it doesn't belong, where should it go? Because many ideas maybe fill into a different area of training versus this is how we do it, practices and policies. And what I found very interesting is that JPL is actually passing their knowledge down to program teams and asking them to be accountable to these at their major design reviews. So essentially, they're creating knowledge in the workflow, they're doing it their own way, but they're making a commitment that the knowledge is being presented to their teams and asking their teams to be accountable to them. And when they have to deviate, there's a process to submit a waiver. So they're introducing that as part of their business practice. So looking at the lessons learned workflow, I wanted to show you how we've built it up. Starting with the needs. So we require a robust process to promote lessons to a trusted status and manage this life cycle. This is important because today, what we're doing is just creating our lessons. We don't have a review process. We don't try to certify them and make sure that they're ready for prime time. And that's led to itself to somewhat of a suggestion box of lessons without real review. So this phase of curation makes a commitment to making sure that the lessons could be refined, the authors get engaged, we can make sure it's extensible, it's worthwhile to socialize, and from this phase one creation, we can move forward to actually doing something different. As we go into our use and infuse phase, we're looking at establishing a need to make sure our teams have access. So we certainly can use the techniques that are out there to push and socialize and do newsletters, but we can also be a little bit more creative and use tools like the assessment controls to tailor certain types of knowledge around lessons learned and present them to teams. We could be more active. And that's why I'm really talking about socialize and activate. I'm making a strong case that we can't wait for people to go and find lessons. We have to be more active and push them. This one, for us at the lab, is the most exciting. We want a process to go about assessing how we take action on lessons. Our concern is that in 10 years, we're going to go from the 500 lessons learned that we have today to 1,500, and then all of a sudden, that's a huge workload on people to learn those lessons. That just sounds like a burden. And when you're looking at the audience, the concept of knowledge management should benefit people that are doing the work. That's extra work. So this commitment here about assessing these lessons and deciding should we move towards further mitigation, and then a commitment to if we decide to move forward, we acknowledge it's going to take time, money, and priorities to see those through. Not everything is going to be easy. We need a plan to track those actions. So today, this is part of the enabling opportunities for us to say we have lessons that are meaningful, but maybe we want to introduce a new material into space processing. There's some screening that has to be done. Maybe we want to change how we do our design reviews and capture certain latent issues that we see crop up. That's not going to come without work. So during this use and infuse stage, we're getting information out there, but we're also putting forth a plan to track progress towards institutional learning. And on the back end, we want to capture metrics to show the people that are supporting this that there is clear investment towards mission success. Because that's at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is really deliver on time, not repeat the same types of problems, and make sure that the new people coming through the door in our organization have an easier way to approach without learning themselves. And this is where reporting and AI-informed learning opportunities really create an opportunity to have patterns be identified for us rather than having somebody specifically think about this every day. So this is really exciting. And all these things on the bottom that are identified by knowledge aware came out through this conversation around this practice. Now, for me to say infusion of lessons learned sounds good, but it is stirring positive emotions back home. But we had to identify what that infusion could look like. And we're starting this process to look at effectiveness and creating a clearer path for infusing knowledge. And so similar to the hierarchy of control for managing hazards, we're taking a step in a similar step and saying, we have choices when we infuse these lessons learned. We can address the most effective by eliminating the root cause of the lesson, or we can do the least effective is just allow people to read the newsletters we send out, or let them pass along through social exchanges what they've learned and share. So on these two extremes, you can see this is what a lot of us are doing. But if we want to start to change people's behavior by introducing organizational training, now we have an option to start moving up the effectiveness ladder. And this is a work in progress, but this is allowing us a better perspective on how we can choose infusion paths, because you can't eliminate everything. And you have to rely upon a mixture of controls or assessments to make it all work out. And by having this plan, I think we're at the foundation of being able to utilize this in our pilot workflow to improve this over time. I think some of the keys for me is that if we were to have engineering controls, formal best practices associated with milestones like critical design review or test readiness reviews, which I think many of us might share, or even peer reviews, you're susceptible to who was involved, whether they came off of vacation, whether they hydrated that day, there's so many variables, but by writing it down, you've done better. But that engineering control can be made with more certainty into end results by having an assessment with the potential for an audit. And the idea to be able to deliver this information to people and have the ability to look back is very promising. So as I look to wrap up, I wanted to show how this infusion path is helping us change some of the ways that we're looking. So the use and infuse step, a lesson learned would come in, and there would be a decision on this is worthwhile, it's going to benefit multiple programs, different subsystems, different disciplines. But what do we do with it? So we can start with what we know. We have a variety of quality management practices. These are program management procedures, design documents, fabrication assembly procedures. These are the documents that live somewhere on a website that people often don't always go and search out on their day-to-day business practice, but defines how we should be doing business. So the question is, could the lessons just flow in to make those better? And we can use the issues to track our progress towards infusion. And the great news is that these already exist. We can utilize these today. We can also use assessments in a smart way to push those out to the programs to say, are you compliant with these? That's a completely new way of doing things that we're not yet exploring. We're not making programs accountable to those PDFs that live up on a server website somewhere. So this can activate them. But then we started to identify what happens if we can't find a lesson learned to flow into that path. Now we have this area of new opportunities. And it's through the knowledge-aware practice conversation that we're having internally that we're looking at these what-if scenarios. So you're going to see a lot of derive on this side of the chart. So we can start by deriving content for training. Now this helps identify behavior around business practice, but we can start to think about who's going to benefit from this. Is this specific to a role like an electrical engineer versus a designer, a fabrication technician? By allowing the lessons to flow into potential content for training, now we have this real nice way to democratize our learning and infuse it into training and pay that forward. And we can use assessments to review who's trained. These are just some opportunities for us to use not just the KPACs to derive knowledge, but the assessments to deliver. There's a theme here for many of you that I'm walking away with, that there are engineering principles and practices that define your way of doing business. And I think this is a really strong takeaway for us. We're excited about this, that we don't have quite those written down. They're very much in the heads of people, and people are great, but processes are sometimes a little bit better for making sure those things live beyond. So what I'm pushing here is the idea that some lessons might and should be considered engineering practices and principles. And this is heavily leveraged on NASA and JPL's approach, but by aligning them to technical discipline, the program management or mission assurance, these are the core three that kind of help us execute successful deliveries on high reliability programs. We can start to organically create content from the ground up, rather than trying to look back 10 years and figure out what should we have done. And lastly, when it comes to lessons, it's going to take time to infuse. And during that time, we have to share. We have to get the information out to people. So the idea would be to show that lessons could be delivered more actively to people in these programs, aligned with certain job roles, and use the assessments to get that out there. And we're using smart filtering. We have just thought about what's important to us. What are the 6 questions to useful knowledge that get the right lesson to the right people? And it comes down, the roles are very important, the scope of their program, where the space, airborne, underwater. And as you start to use those filters that we've created that are unique to our business, we start to get to a point where fairly reasonable lessons start to propagate out towards the back of that filter. And we're hopeful, we're in the process of piloting this, that the outcome, we can refine the process of the filtering to reduce the noise that comes out. That's the end hope. So I wanted to quickly wrap up with a summary that the engineering division is very much engaged in this process. It's not just lessons learned specific that I'm talking about today, but knowledge in general. I want to expand my possibilities to learn from you all. I've been very fortunate to meet many of you, but if you do have anything that you'd like to meet and talk about, please see me around. I'd love to learn from you and share other approaches. This pilot workflow is in process. We are looking at utilizing that hierarchy of effectiveness and making some decisions on how to infuse into the business practice. Our seed project is underway, and we're making it very clear that this is a process that we're just starting to reinvigorate, that has been pretty much stale for 10 years since we first formally started it. And there's this commitment that it's going to evolve, it's going to change, and we need an agile knowledge management system that's going to allow us to do that. So with that, I wanted to say thank you for the time today.
Excellent, Carl. And we have some questions. All right, you'll stick around, yeah?
Perfect.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I'll read them off for you. Okay. Number 1, what TRL level do you target, and does the technology you develop get shared with industry?
That's a good question. When it comes to the sharing of the knowledge with the industry, that's pretty much communicated through our sponsors. The sponsors pay us to develop the technology. We don't often develop on our own. And within their organizations and the Lincoln staff that engage with those sponsors, they share what capabilities we have and what risks we burn down. So I would very much say that it's the people paying for the work that understand that.
Okay, good stuff. Next up, infusion paths, lessons. Is it critical for Lincoln Labs to measure resulting differences between actual versus lessons, divergent ones sent to authors?
Can you repeat that one more time?
I would love to. Infusion paths / lessons. Is it critical for Lincoln Labs to measure resulting differences between actual versus lessons? And then it says divergent ones sent to authors.
Yeah, I think that there's a conversation around this particular question that I would certainly like to dive in deeper if someone was to find me later. But I think that lessons have a lot of context. But why did that occur? We've seen a lot of lessons that have occurred because the team was just not aware that there was process in place to do a job a certain way. And the result of that was, that's not really a lesson. This is just that we need to figure out how to train people better, that there was a process that just wasn't followed. And so this is an example of, for me, lessons should infuse a look back and a reflection on why did that occur. And not every lesson needs to be a lesson. Some of the lessons could be retired and say it's just we're moving towards a better training opportunity. So I don't feel like I've answered that question the way it was meant, but that's kind of what I was thinking about originally.
Well, you had the invitation to come find you and talk more one-on-one,
I'm very
right?
excited for those opportunities.
You're around here today, yes?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Perfect. Any other questions? Yeah, so we'll bring a mic, Tyler. Oh, we've got two you saw. Okay, thanks. So there, Brian brought you, and then, okay.
So as you infuse your lessons learned into your processes, how do you ensure that you don't overburden them? I have, for example, in my world, I have a whole bunch of people putting in these lessons learned into the way we write certain requirements, and now we're finding that when we go out to source, that now it almost becomes more of a burden because so-and-so had this problem and so-and-so had this problem. How do you filter all of that so that you don't create some massive document?
Yeah, it's a very great question. I'm taking a reflection back from a JPL lesson learned about trying to apply NASA lessons learned. And I'm not shortchanging it, it's a very worthwhile lesson to read. And JPL's takeaway for me is, I'm using it because I'm very passionate that's how I'm thinking about it. If you try to just pass the lessons forth as written, it can be very complicated for people, and cumbersome to learn it all. What JPL's approach was, which is what I'm thinking that we need to do, which is part of the derived content side of things, is create very concise, specific knowledge from the lesson. That's what we're asking our teams to interact with. It's not the lesson. The lesson creates great cross-reference. It's a historical reference, that it has all the context. It's very verby and has a lot of details, but it's there if someone wants to dig into it deeper. There's a historical background. But what's presented to people, that's the actionable side as business practice specific, is clear, to the point, and is enabling how we change business. And I think this commitment to no longer trying to ask people to learn these lessons, but infuse them into tangible things that actually are easy to address and easy to acknowledge compliance with, is what I'm after. And I think that's going to come with, it's going to require effort, because you have to derive, and that derive is extra work. But the idea is that addressing the people that have to use this lesson, it's so much easier to digest that when it's distilled down into something short and simple. And part of our path moving forward is, what does the process of governance look like around this, right? If we have that 1,000 suggestions come in, because I believe you want people to submit these lessons, how do you look through them? What's involved? Who's going to adjudicate what gets pushed forward? And who's going to track, who's going to be leading the tracking of those towards closure? And at some point, you're going to have to decide what is worth the effort. And I think that's, for us, tracking Infusion is often a few months to multiple years. And you're going to focus on the ones that are the biggest win for the company and overall, and let the knowledge just kind of fit in on the backside. Thank you for that question.
Can I ask a derived question to what Paula was asking about? Carl?
Yeah, the voice is coming somewhere.
Sorry.
Oh,
Yeah, we're blinded by the light. That's why we couldn't see you.
That's exactly what I was doing. I was like, there's a light there.
You have so many distinct ideas you've coined them into remarkable terms that we at Oros can also benefit from. You call it infused, derived, event-based. These are wonderful ideas, and I want to ask you a question and then make a comment about these. But you talk about the burden, Paula mentioned the burden, say at GM, of learning things prior to them being needed. And I look back to our own education system. You first go to college or university and you burden yourself with an enormous amount of learning. And we ask ourselves, everyone here asks ourselves, and I'm sure we've made this comment to somebody near to us, well, how much of all that stuff that I learned do I actually use today? And you referred to this as the burden of pre-learning, so to speak, and how much effort should go into that versus learning on the fly in line with the task. And at Oros, I'm sure you've just had the chance to discuss this with our AEs and with Jeff, that where you draw the line of pre-learning versus learning on the in-line is a gray area for us, and I'm sure for every learning organization, where one draws these separating lines between a derived knowledge versus the origin knowledge, atomic knowledge versus molecular knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
I'm throwing out some disparate thoughts on this because of the burden that you mentioned.
Carl,
Then you mentioned, and let me just add one other dimension, and you can comment on this potpourri of borders that I'm trying to draw.
Sure.
And these are the borders of sponsor organizations. You mentioned JPL learnings and NASA learnings. And when you sit and you chat with vendors here who are tier 1 vendors to Ford, GM, Toyota, and Honda, they have to draw the same lines as to whose knowledge was it that they need to properly implement against.
Mm-hmm.
There are different standards sometimes, JPL standards and NASA standards. But these present knowledge challenges that we at Oros see, and I'm hearing you describe them in very terse terms, which are very effective terms.
Well, thank you for that, Carl. You want to jump in and see if you can
Yeah.
answer just a little bit? We have like a minute or so.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Thank
great.
you.
Yeah. So in short, I appreciate all these perspectives because I'm going to be taking these back home. But it's very true that the simplicity that I'm offering here is meant to be simple and infuse bigger ideas on what each one of these things mean. But absolutely, our business, some knowledge that's unique to a program and the sponsor, it's not what we're looking at necessarily putting into this system. It's the organizational knowledge that we're looking for. We want to harness lessons that are more general that can help us do our jobs better. Because it comes down to, we meet with our sponsors and speak to their requirements with all these formal reviews. And in the end, they determine if we've done a good job. But this is a reflection on, have we done a good job against our own standards? And it's this opportunity of the Knowledge Project that's brought, hey, we could change things. We could ask ourselves to be accountable to self-learning. But it's hard to do that unless you put the learning into a knowledge tool that allows you to make it easier to share and spread and make people have accessibility to it.
All right. Well,
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, thank
That's
you.
all the time we have
All
for
right,
this
appreciate
session.
it.
Yay. Thanks.